People in outside. So this is the.
And then all you do for this is you just click. There's a click. And you just click here and there. Which goes into the.
All right.
And if you need the laser pointer, there's a laser pointer on the base. We also have a stick. Okay. Yeah, we want to say
Yes.
Right. Good morning, everyone. I hope you were able to wrap up into training. Come back and find your seats so we can get started with our first main session. Using data as a tool in advancing inclusive housing access. Thank you.
We'd like to get going on our next session. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Before we start, I just wanted to shout out, we have a sensory-friendly tent. If you go through these doors right here, you'll see across the hallway, another set of doors, and in there's a tent. They're really amazing. You won't even feel like you're in a conference if you need that space. But thank you all for having me today. My name is Jordan Mulholland. Oh, do you want to talk?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tim. Tim's running it all, so we need to say hello.
Thanks very much, everybody. My name is Tim Dolan. I'm with the Inclusive Housing Coalition. Sorry I was a little late. I just wanted to take a minute here to thank everybody for coming. We have because of all of you, we have a terrific turnout. I think we have a terrific program today. I want to thank Allie Joel and Rebecca Seiden, who are out there manning well, Rebecca's here, but Allie's out manning the check-in for all their work that they did in putting this together, as well as all the other folks like Jordan who helped to put this together as well. So yes, some round of applause for them. And I especially want to thank the presenters who you're going to hear from today. You know, when I started reaching out to folks a couple of months ago about presenting at this particular conference, you know, everybody enthusiastically and immediately said yes. And I really appreciate them giving of their time and of their experience today to help further this effort along. You know, but you know, you're going to start to hear some fairly really specific and details here and some technical stuff, which is going to be great. But please understand that the content that you receive in the sessions, as excellent as that is, it's really only part of why we're here today. One of the really important reasons for being here today is to make connections, and that will help further things along. And we have about 200 registrants here. So if everybody just walks away today with like 3 contacts, then that's 600 contacts today, just today, for the purpose of furthering neuro-inclusive housing. So please do that. I just want to make a plug. When you leave here today, when you take this away, please contact us at the Inclusive Housing Coalition, ihccolorado.org, so that we can help you, so that you can help us help you further this effort along. We are really encouraged to have everybody join us and in any way that they can to help this along. This past week, we lost a real champion and leader in the field of neuro-inclusive housing, Barb Ziegler. I had the good fortune to get to know Barb and work with her in some of the financing of the Trailhead project. And I'm just really happy that her vision is about to come to fruition down there. And I think she would be really happy about that. So I just hope that the efforts that we put in today and what we take away from today will honor her legacy in some small way. With that, I would like to introduce our second session of the day, and that is our using data as a tool in advancing inclusive housing access. And to kick us off, it's going to start with from the City and County of Denver, Jordan Mulholland. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Tim. And thank you, everyone, for the welcome. My name is Jordan Mulholland. My pronouns are she, her, and I am from the Denver Human Services IDEAS program. IDEAS stands for Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, Equitable Access to Services. And I'm here to talk a little bit about the research efforts we've done throughout the past several years and how they've translated into meaningful services for our community. And so just a little bit about who we are. We are a mill levy program, and we partner with the community to manage local taxpayer dollars dedicated for Denver residents with IDD. We typically try to fill service gaps not covered by Medicaid long-term care. And we do this through our pillars of service, which you'll see on the bottom left-hand side. These are actually identified through research and engagement. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see our small but mighty team. In the room today with me is my incredible program manager, Michaela Hennig. Give a wave. She oversees all that we do, as well as my great colleague, Lynn Kuttner, who works in our gaps and services field. So none of the work that we do could be done without the guidance and support from our IDEAS Advisory Council. These are a group of appointed community members many who have lived experience of IDD, have a loved one with IDD, or they work in the field. And they meet with us monthly to offer guidance on how to use our funds to best meet the needs of our community. They do this by formal recommendations that they vote on, and then we at DHS then record those votes, and as a team, we consider them for further review. Is there any IDEAS Advisory Council folks in the room here today? Just wanted to give you a shout out. Hello, hi, yes, they would be great to talk to if you ever want to learn more. Our next meeting is actually tomorrow from 1 to 3. And you can use that QR code if you'd like to join and listen in. You can even pre-submit a formal public comment. Here. How? I don't know why the screen stopped moving. Let's see if I can do it like this. Rebecca. While we wait, oh, there it is. Oh, no, it's not. Okay. While we wait, I can move forward through this next part. So our work has really continued since 2018, and I want to acknowledge that a lot of our research was led or contributed by folks before my time, many of whom are here in the room today that I'll make sure to shout out, as well as just we're full of gratitude for those folks who've been able to partner with them. Our journey has been rather exploratory, meaning that we've leaned on what we've learned from year to year as a tool in finding solutions. And so really our first research was conducted in 2018. We did what was called a community needs assessment. And we did this in order to better understand how to leverage our funds so that they're best meeting the needs of our IDD community. So we hired an independent consultant who gathered feedback within the community, and they did this through the form of focus groups, surveys, presentations, and I'll pause while we.
Sorry, I'm here to fix the AV.
Okay, just a.
This should work now.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, so this was the timeline of our work. And then we'll move into really what happened in 2018. Like I said, we hired an independent consultant to do this work. And they did several research methods, focus groups, presentations, surveys, really in an attempt to outreach as many voices as possible. They ended up generating responses from over 500 unique individuals in Denver. And the findings were used to inform our work in the preceding years. One of the most crucial pieces of information that we learned was that affordable housing was the #1 biggest problem reported by Denver residents with IDD and their families. We learned that while many folks wanted to live independently with tailored supports, there were barriers that rarely allowed them to do so. I think we all know this still exists today. So the researchers recommended that DHS look at ways to reduce the housing cost burden. And since that was fairly broad, we knew we needed more information before we could move forward in this space. So this is what opened us up to a multi-year stakeholder engagement process where we were able to connect with folks and really learn what was truly happening in our communities. During that community engagement process, we discovered that there were many other folks and organizations investigating this housing crisis. So we had ideas, as well as folks at Laredon, Colorado Fund for People with Disabilities, ARC Thrift Stores, ARC of Colorado, Cottonwood, Rocky Mountain Human Services, Denver Housing Authority, Easter Seals, and Gorman and Company. We all sought to better understand the barriers to housing from the perspectives of people with IDD and local leaders in the industry. Therefore, we co-led a research project that was produced what is now called the Inclusive Housing Report. The research was facilitated by Desiree Kamika Galloway, who we all just had an incredible presentation by. I don't know if she's here. Raise her hand, Desiree. Great job on that report. And she did that in partnership with a steering committee of those same leading organizations. The report consisted of surveys, presentations, and focus groups. And findings revealed that the housing crisis within the IDD community was severe and complex. We learned that 36% of participants were living with a primary caregiver over the age of 60, showcasing the alarming need for intervention when these caregivers can no longer provide the care or the housing for their IDD loved one. When looking at housing preferences, we saw they were quite diverse. Some people wanted to rent their own apartment with supportive amenities, where others wanted to own their own home. And many wanted to live close by their families and friends, such as residing in a tiny home or accessory dwelling unit. We learned that over 50% of respondents wanted to live in a community where people with and without disabilities could come together as neighbors and enjoy the natural supports that were produced as a result. And what we learned for certain from this report is that people with IDD wanted choice in where and how they lived, and they felt the ability to make that choice was inaccessible to them due to the lack of options currently available. Lastly, we learned that housing leaders did not feel familiar enough about the housing needs for people with IDD to feel empowered to create better housing that is accessible and affordable to them. So this slide is meant to articulate the process we activated to take advantage of the data that we had gathered. So we reviewed the data within both reports, and we brought in conversations with our advisory council around what this data meant and where we could go from here. The advisory council made eventually made several recommendations on how to intervene through targeted funding opportunities. We then took those recommendations and actualized them into investments into new programs. So I wanted to share a few examples of how we've been able to do that. As I mentioned, the community needs assessment was what truly paved the way in solidifying our work in housing. So our first intervention occurred during COVID-19 in response to the economic crises people were experiencing. Had the housing crisis not already been documented in our needs assessment, we would not have been able to use our dollars to help people as quickly as we did at the time. And so because of that, we felt comfortable executing a housing stabilization contract with Rocky Mountain Human Services, which is a program that provides emergency temporary housing, rental, and mortgage assistance for individuals with IDD and their families. Just in 2020 alone, Rocky Mountain spent over $400,000 to help stabilize over 200 individuals with IDD. And this program is now fully embedded into Rocky Mountain's IDEAS funded mill levy services, along with a bonus and crucial program called Mission Supports, which is a team who helps people experiencing homelessness enroll and navigate their Medicaid services. So if we look at the second row, you'll see how we leverage data from both reports to develop a housing navigator program. It was apparent that many people did not feel like they had enough support to navigate the complexities of housing. On top of this, the Inclusive Housing Report revealed the alarming reality that many Denverites with IDD were experiencing homelessness. So because of this, our advisory council recommended that we offer programming to help people understand, plan, and pursue their housing options in Denver. The vast data helped us feel confident that this was a true gap in our community that we had an opportunity to fill. So we partnered with Bayard Enterprises to create this housing navigation program, which is now called the Be Home IDD program. Many of you will have opportunity today to attend sessions that go into more detail on this work. I just want to thank Erica Hostetler from Be Home, Erica, as well as Arnie Swenson from Mission Supports, who are here today to share with you their experiences and successes with these interventions. I also want to thank Abby Grinstead for being here as well, who supports our mill levy funded services at Rocky Mountain. So the third row shows how we use data to commission more data. While both reports revealed key insights that we could utilize right away, we learned of new gaps that required new thought sharing. We learned that the housing community was relatively absent from the conversations that were continuing to occur within the IDD community. And so because of that, our advisory council asked that we investigate and identify landlord and builder concerns with renting and creating housing for people with IDD in Denver. And this is what led to our most recent research project, which we commissioned with the Kelsey, called the Landlord and Builder Assessment. So before I hand it over to Louisa, I just wanted to share really that this report, we were aiming to get a better understanding of new perspectives to the problem. We knew that there was more work to do and that we needed influential partners in the room to make that work happen. We really wanted to know what the people who build and manage housing might need to create housing that is affordable, accessible, and inclusive. So Louisa Bouquet is here today from the Kelsey, and we'll go into more details on that report and what was found. The report outlines a set of recommendations for Denver to consider, and we are exploring those recommendations as we speak. So lastly, as you can see, the work has continued to progress over the past 6 years. And the more that we learn, the more we feel equipped to explore new research-based ideas and solutions with all stakeholders involved, from the people with IDD themselves to the people who design and build our homes and our communities. And I'll go ahead and pass it to Louisa. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jordan. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to present to you the thinking behind and the results of the research study that Jordan just discussed. The idea was to find It was to understand barriers and to propose solutions to housing for people with IDD within the Denver metro area, specifically from a builder and landlord perspective. First, I'm going to tell you just a short bit about my organization, the Kelsey. We work as a national organization to pioneer disability-forward housing solutions that open homes and opportunities to everyone. We do that in two main ways. We are an active housing developer where we have our own projects, which help inform, which both act as examples of how you can create disability forward and also help us understand how to make the whole field better. We also do active policy and advocacy work to create better conditions to be able to create more of the kind of housing that we and others in this room then build. I'm Louisa Bouquet. I'm a housing development manager at the Kelsey, which means I do a lot of work on our active developments, as well as technical assistance projects with partners like Jordan and the Ideas program to help move this discussion forward and explore solutions to create more housing for people who need it. So the stakeholder research that we did on this project really focused on not necessarily the people in this room. It focused on landlords and property managers and not necessarily people who focused on IDD housing. We wanted to understand how to make people who didn't already create housing for people with IDD, how to help encourage them and have them recognize that this is a problem and that they're part of the solution for it. So we spent a while focusing our research goals, and it was really important for us these were the 6 goals we settled on to make sure that our research actually answered the problems and the questions that we were trying to understand. So the first was collecting data from multiple stakeholders. Housing is a really complex field. There's a lot of people, a lot of organizations that have parts of it. And so we knew that we couldn't just ask property managers. We needed to understand many different perspectives to have a better understanding of the full problem. We needed to match our collection methods to the stakeholders. Of course, different groups of people kind of engage with this issue in a different way. And so making sure that we're always thinking about who we're talking to and how to best engage them in the work. It was very important for us to collect and amplify underrepresented voices. There are a lot of people who are very actively engaged in the IDD community, and that's incredible work that people are pushing forward. But we wanted to invite new stakeholders to the table and spend active time and effort to make sure that voices that hadn't yet been heard were heard in this report. It was obviously incredibly key to have representation of residents with IDD themselves telling us what they needed, what they wanted, as you heard in the first panel here, and a lot of the work people in this room do that is key to all of our work, is hearing from the people most affected by this problem. And then the other 2 places we focused were property managers and developers. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of that research. So the first thing, we did a number of focus groups with residents with IDD. We did, I have the findings here, but I'll tell you a short bit about our research methods. We made sure to have both in-person and virtual focus groups to give people different opportunities to engage. For some people, virtual is much more accessible. Other people have a hard time communicating over the Zoom screen, and so it's much more important to be in person. So we had many options. We made sure people were able to bring a support person if that was important for them, and found that many people, 2/3 of our participants participated with a support person. So that was like a very important access need. And think of other ways we made it accessible. And just having multiple opportunities to engage. We also had surveys both before and after. So kind of creating conditions where there's many different ways to give feedback was really important for this research. What we found was these are the 3 top findings in the report, which is accessible on the Ideas website. You can read much, much more, but 3 top findings here were that dependence on support people was really key. People who had homes usually found the homes that they had through support services, whether that's their family or a more formal support service. And like I said, many people brought a support person to the focus groups, and people constantly talked about how their family and support services helped get them where they were. It's important to note here that the people without those supports were the voices we didn't hear. So 2/3 of the folks who came brought a support person. People who didn't have access to support people, we might not have been able to even reach out to invite to our focus groups. So always being aware of the voices you're not hearing are the ones with the least support and the least resources. Secondly, navigating complex systems. We heard over and over again how complex it is to layer these different waivers, to find housing that's both you can live in and you can afford to live in and has the support you need. It's just, there's no common resources. There's not even common language. There's lots of jargon. It's a complex world, and help navigating that world is key. And third was just the housing options available. More housing in safe, low-crime neighborhoods that's connected by transit was a constant ask. Easier systems to fill out applications, and accessibility within the homes that are available, and understanding what the accessibility options are, if those are included in your needs. Our second part of the research was interviews with property managers. And here we did one-on-one focused interviews where we asked every property manager the same set of questions to learn from them how they saw their role in housing people with IDD. And we tried to make sure that we talked to property managers who both had active experience. Well, almost any property manager does have active experience, but property managers who sort of were aware and engaged with this problem, and ones that just had no sense that there was a group of people like this even meeting about it, to make sure that we're bringing in all those voices. We talked to property managers who managed an individual apartment complex, as well as ones who are high-up managers who covered 10,000 units across the full region. So trying to get understanding from people at many different levels within property management as well. And just to review, property managers are the folks who actively are working with residents in housing. They're the ones who certify them to get them into housing, do the intake interviews, as well as help them while they're in housing, and are often the ones who, when there's an issue, they're the navigator of an issue within housing. So they're a really key partner within housing stability to both get people housed as well as keep them in housing once they're housed. They understood very deeply how complicated leasing processes were. They're the ones managing it, and still to them it's very complex. And they knew that people are getting so much information, it's an information overload, but they felt they didn't have the resources to reduce that or to help that in any way. So providing them with resources to help others navigate this complex process, they already were asking for that. And secondly, their communication with residents, many property managers talked about how their role was to house people. They wanted to make sure people had a place to live, but they didn't have the tools or the understanding or the background or education to be able to give that support to people with IDD. So that was a really key gap within the education system for property managers. And property managers have a very robust educational program because they have to always be working with fair housing law. They have yearly trainings on many different compliance regulations. And so we thought this was actually an opportunity, which I'll talk about in a moment, to be able to work a training on how to work with residents with IDD into trainings that are already happening within this world. And so in terms of training and working with the IDD population, very few had any, and many we talked to were very interested in learning more. Property managers are interested in supporting their residents. We just need to provide them with the tools to do so. And finally, we hosted a Houser and Developer Roundtable. So we brought together developers, people within local governments, and advocates to talk about the issues they saw, the solutions they saw, what they needed to do their work better, in a roundtable discussion over a few hours to engage with each other and learn from each other. The top findings here, number one was funding. You'll hear this a lot. There aren't funding streams for IDD specifically. There are very few funding streams for disability. More funding is key to be able to create the kind of housing that we need, and more directed funding so that we're not competing for all the other fundings with all the other developers out there. Second was meeting resident needs. So this comes with matching people with the homes they need, whether it's an accessible home for someone who has access needs, or more community engagement resources to continue to understand what their communities need. And then finally, they asked for more government opportunities, specific funding streams to fund this kind of housing. So flexible resources that doesn't have to fit other boxes. A lot of funding streams within affordable housing have very specific rules and requirements, and they sometimes don't interact well even with each other. So making sure we have more flexible funding allows us to put that money towards the type of housing we believe is important. There were specific asks that get into kind of like more details of funding we can go into later. And specifically, there was an ask to attach a housing subsidy to IDD specific to HCBS waivers. So these systems that are already providing support to people with IDD, can we add a waiver, a housing voucher on top of that that will allow people to pay for the homes that they need? So all of this fed into this kind of graphic that we use to summarize all the different barriers to housing that people face along their housing journey. And it was important for us to recognize that there wasn't one key point that was hard. There were many points along the way that's hard. And this is why people fall out of housing and can't get the housing they need. It's because they're constantly confronted with a new barrier that restricts their access. So, you know, they might not even know what affordable housing opportunities are available to them. It's a complex system and there's not an easy way to see. Once they find housing, there might not be, the available units might not fit their access needs. We do a very poor job of matching access needs to available units. And so you might not find a unit that you can even live in. Property managers might be unsupportive in the income certification process. Again, not because they're trying to be mean, but because they don't have an understanding of how to support people through that very complex paperwork heavy process. And then even once you're housed, people might be housed but isolated. You heard from the panel earlier today how important community and connection is for all of us in our homes, and especially people with IDD. And so if you're housed, you have, you know, 4 walls, you have a ceiling, you have a bedroom and a kitchen, but you don't have access to community. That alone might make you unable to stay. So the second part of this report was how do we remove these barriers to housing? And the Kelsey came up with a number of recommendations for ideas and the greater community on ways to start removing some of these barriers so people have more access. And I apologize for the smaller font here. So strategy 1 was increase availability of operating subsidies to support service-linked projects. This was something we heard over and over again, and again, you heard this morning, was services and supportive services within housing is so important to keep people housed. It's not just the physical housing, it's what supports they have within it. And yet streams for funding affordable housing rarely include good opportunities for operating budgets. So operating budgets are very narrow. There's very little slack in them. And so having extra staff available on site is a very hard thing to pay for. At the Kelsey, our developments, we always have what we call our inclusion concierge, which is on-site staff, full-time on-site staff, whose role it is to support people with all their access needs. They're not providing direct services. They're making sure people in our buildings can connect with the services they need. They're being that in-between support of finding the services they need and making sure that they can fill out the paperwork, they can get that access. They're also building community. They're doing multiple times a month. They're hosting resident get-togethers, a movie night, a game night. There's trick-or-treating happening this week at one of our buildings, creating the informal support network that communities can build to help each other out as well. But paying for their salaries is expensive and operating budgets are very tight. And so having specific ways to be able to increase our capacity for operating budgets is huge for being able to create community within inclusive housing. We have 2 specific ways we recommend doing this. One would be an operating subsidy that can be used to pay for those services. And the second one is specific project-based vouchers for people with IDD, which will help them pay their rent, but allows a landlord to then collect more rent on a unit and give them more capacity within their operating budgets to pay for these services. So strategy 2 was local funding, incentives, and enforcement. So this is working with local governments to be able to pay directly a subsidy for housing that's being developed for people with IDD. So this can come in many different ways. You can incentivize housing developers who are going beyond ADA code by giving them more money if they have a project that includes accessibility within their design. You can prioritize funding projects where accessibility is part of their mission. And you can also work the city and state, these recommendations were for the city, but obviously this applies to many different local government levels, provide guidance, reminding owners of their obligation. There are laws that are around and a lot of landlords and builders don't understand or fully fulfill their obligations for things like reasonable accommodation. And so making sure that there's a lot of education to remind them of their obligation that already exists. Strategy 3, doing a time check here, was increase the availability and use of vouchers. So having a voucher specific for people who are already using home and community-based services to be able to make sure that people can live in integrated settings, can choose where they would like to live instead of having to live in a place that that is, you know, provided for them. They can take that voucher and use it wherever they want to live, so they can live close to their community, close to transportation, all those requests we heard from the panel this morning. Strategy 4 was create navigation support. Jordan talked about the wonderful work that's already being done to provide that support for the IDD community in Denver. That should happen across the state. But the other thing we heard from many of our residents in our focus groups was that they didn't understand that already existed. So there's these amazing resources. Let's give more funding to make sure that we can market that so people know it's around and can actually make use of the resources available. The next strategy was educational support for property managers. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but property management has a really great, robust training regimen to make sure that property managers are always up to date on current laws for fair housing and compliance. Let's work an IDD component into that training. So property managers, when they encounter someone with IDD in their intake process, they know how to work with them and don't dismiss them out of hand because because it's a little more difficult or because they're having their sort of conflicting access needs between what the property manager is asking and what the resident can actually provide. Part of that would also be increasing use of plain language. And we talk about leasing documents, requiring that leasing documents have a plain language component. These documents are very complex. They're many pages long. They're written at a graduate school level. Let's make sure that all of our communications across any spectrum are always in plain language so more people can engage. And then the last, in some ways, like one of the biggest strategy recommendation was to fund an IDD housing pilot project. So cities are capable of directing towards a specific project that that can serve as an example for other people of that this can happen, this can be done, and here are the strategies to make it happen. Specifically, the city could provide land for a project. It could provide in-kind waiving of impact fees or pre-development capital, which is always the hardest capital to get into a project. All of these components could help spur a project that could exemplify many of the other recommendations that I talked about. It would meet immediate needs by housing people in an IDD supportive community, but it would also be able to pilot some of these other recommendations and serve as a demonstration project for other people to follow and be able to draw from for future projects. Thank you very much, and I'm going to pass it over to Rebecca.
Thank you. I'm going to try to be speedy so we can get to our last presenter as well.
Mine is very data-based. And what we did was, sorry, I'm Rebecca Seiden. I met you all this morning. I have the privilege to work for Boulder County Human Services as their IDD Mill Levy Program Coordinator. So I'm going to present a combination of data today. Some from a telephone survey that was completed in collaboration with A&I Avenues, which used to be Imagine, and data received from Healthcare Policy and Financing and Wayfinders. Boulder County contracted with A&I Avenues, formerly known as Imagine, the Community Center Board for Boulder County this past spring. And it was to complete a telephone survey about housing needs in Boulder County. All residents of Boulder County that are currently on Medicaid waivers were called. Those waivers included supported living services. I'm sorry, I think did we switch slides? No. It included supported living services, developmental disabilities, brain injury, state SLS waivers, elderly, blind, and disabled waivers, and persons on children's waivers 16 and above. The reason that Boulder County included EBD waivers and brain injury waivers is because our mill levy does cover those populations. The purpose of this survey was to obtain more information regarding specific client statistics. Nope. Having trouble here. It did switch. Okay. So this slide shows the age of person receiving services in Boulder County who are on waivers. Please notice the 16 to 21 age range. That is significant as we look at investing in future housing initiatives and development of housing spaces. This slide shows the distribution of current living arrangements. As you can see, 73.87% of the respondents currently live with parents, family, friends, and guardians. That is an extremely alarming figure. I'm struck by this slide as it shows the lack of vouchers that are available by the respondents. Many respondents commented that due to the insufficiency of appropriate housing funding distribution, there isn't an opportunity to fix some of their broken items. Oops, we switch again. Let me reposition my papers. That must be the problem. Thank you, Jordan. You looked at me like that. Oh. I'm sorry. Okay, sorry about that. So that there isn't an opportunity to fix broken items in their current homes or to help manage present physical barriers. This slide addresses a pressing concern highlighted by statistics regarding individuals who are currently living with and cared for by aging parents. A significant finding is that 38% of respondents in services live with caregivers age 65 and older. This trend raises important questions about future care and support. Many aging caregivers express deep concern about the future support for their adult children, particularly regarding arrangements that will need to be made after their passing. There is a prevailing fear among these caregivers that their adult children may be placed in residential settings, which many are concerned may not meet their children's needs. Desired supports. You can see that the highest category was living with parents, family, and guardians in their home. But you can also see that there's a 28.56% interest in companion or host home model and living alone. Obstacles. Comments were made by the respondents that concerned logistical challenges, transportation, clients faced with current living situations, lack of monetary resources to fund bigger living spaces with accessible laundry facilities on site, and a lack of Section 8 vouchers. Survey takers commented that to achieve optimal independence regarding future housing, they would require ongoing training in money management, paying monthly bills, grocery shopping, daily living skills training, food preparation, house cleaning practices, hygiene, and appointment planning and scheduling. Respondents overwhelmingly chose living in a safe environment as the most important variable in ideal housing situations. Something just went off, but you'll have to look on the side. Are you guys able to turn? Can you get, thank you. I'm going to continue going on. Another area of critical need identified in our recent survey is a concern from our Spanish-speaking community. Our review of the Spanish language surveys revealed that many individuals in this category have urgent housing needs that are not being adequately addressed. A significant barrier is the lack of understanding regarding available service waivers, housing vouchers, and unnecessary funding. This knowledge gap leaves many without the support that is needed. The language barrier complicates communication around housing issues and emergent situations. This not only affects individuals, but also hinders service providers from effectively supporting this community. Many Spanish-speaking respondents expressed critical housing concerns, highlighting the need for tailored resources and support that acknowledge their unique challenges. It's essential to develop targeted outreach and education initiatives that bridge these gaps, ensuring that Spanish-speaking individuals are informed about their options and resources. By focusing on the specific needs of the Spanish-speaking community, we can create a more inclusive support system that addresses housing challenges effectively. I'd like to share an important slide from the Healthcare Policy and Financing that illustrates total waiver enrollment by fiscal year. As you see, there is a notable increase in enrollment between the 2020-21 and 2021-22 fiscal years. This trend highlights a growing demand for future housing services. CHIRP has grown significantly, indicating housing is not just a need among adults, but children as well. If you look, the CES enrollment is also up. This slide shows the DD and SLS enrollments for the fiscal year 2023-24. We are seeing a steady growth in DD waivers. I'm just going to quickly go through this slide. This is the CIS tier levels, and you can see that the higher tier level, as we all know, has the higher Medicaid reimbursement. There is steady growth in DD enrollments and a decrease in SLS. And this indicates an increasing need for residential support services. We received data from Wayfinders, an agency that provides RFP management for A&I avenues. This data began in May of this year. There are current challenges surrounding RFP responses for residential services, especially for individuals with lower CIS levels. Here are some key points after looking at the data. The high rate of RFPs marked as closed or expired may indicate a disconnect between service needs and provider availability, particularly for lower tiered CIS levels. While there are successes in placing individuals in higher tiers, level 3, 4, and 6, the ongoing open cases highlight potential gaps in services for individuals with varying support needs. This discrepancy in responses may stem from inadequate reimbursement rates. We all know that, right? Which can deter providers from engaging with RFPs, particularly for lower tiered cases. In conclusion, the data clearly highlights, sorry, Jody. In conclusion, the data clearly highlights the pressing need for increased housing inventory, a challenge faced not just in Boulder, but across the nation. Additionally, it's vital to enhance outreach efforts to various BIPOC communities to ensure their unique needs are addressed. Fostering collaboration among stakeholders, including families, service providers, and advocacy groups, is essential to gain a deeper understanding of community needs and strengthen the housing service network. Recognizing that one size does not fit all will enable us to create more tailored and effective solutions. I'd like now to introduce Jody Walters from Imagine.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. My goal is to talk quickly and give you enough time to head to the bathroom before your next presentation. Okey doke. All right. So I'm going to talk about what do we do with all this data? How do we implement any of it? So really, when we are looking at data, we are talking about external data, we are talking about individual program data, and then we're talking about individual data. And I'm really pleased to see that there has been such a massive increase in external data and really looking at what is happening in our communities and then how can we as a community utilize that data for our own programming. I think in our field, program data is a barrier. I think that we are all particularly made up of a group of social workers. We're really great at individual level data. We love digging in and helping individuals to achieve their goals, but there is a lot of space in that program data. And some of the barriers for program data, and that program data is really critical because you may be able to look at the external data coming in and, you know, some of the external data that we have now, the 2018 Boulder County Community Needs Assessment, the 2021 Inclusive Housing Report, the Boulder County A&I Imagine data that was collected earlier this year. We have really great data that is coming out. But unless you are taking a look at that data, implementing it into your own programs, and then analyzing that data, you're really moving forward in a manner that is not in the best interest of the dollars being utilized. So, and I want to talk about as we're talking about barriers to implementation, you know, our entire system is a barrier to implementation, you know. Just going to name it, sorry. Fee for service really incentivizes that you are documenting and justifying the service that you provide. You are not then looking forward and figuring out how to deliver outcomes. And just to put a fine point on it, HCPF just released some data about a supported employment pilot, incentivized pilot that has been occurring for the last several years. And what that data found was that individuals who participated in an incentivized outcomes-based pilot program for at least a year, they increased their independence by 8%, where the control group was so everybody else receiving supported employment supports in just the fee for service world, they increased their independence by 2%, or 2.5%. And then additionally, individuals in that pilot gained the hours that they worked by 11%. We know outcomes data works. We don't use it in our system. So that's my plug for any policymakers in the room. That's really where we need to head. Our staff really just want to help. So with knowing that the data that we are incentivized to collect just shows us that we did the job. How do we as a service industry really start focusing on paying attention to the outcomes that our services really do provide? That's the challenge. It's a journey. It's shifting to a learning culture. It's really inviting an curiosity amongst individuals to dig into what's working and what's not working. And one of my very favorite statements is perfect is the enemy of good, right? I think that we talk a lot about what are the perfect services, what are the perfect communities, and sometimes it's about taking a step forward. So with I put Imagine on here, and that should really be A&I data because as everybody here, I think, is aware, in July 1, Imagine split, and A&I Avenues is the CMA, the oh my goodness, I just forgot that acronym. Case Management Agency, goodness gracious. And Imagine at this point just provides direct services. But as we took a look at Imagine as a service provider, at that data, we've heard it here today. There are several themes that have emerged. Where people are living doesn't necessarily match with where people want to live. 74% are living with their family, but more than 28%, or almost 30% of the individuals want to live independently or with roommates. 24% of the individuals are living with family members over 65. One of the biggest things that struck me was that 51% of individuals who responded to this survey said they needed some additional skills in order to successfully live independently. 51% of those individuals, those skills broke down into training on money management, paying bills, grocery shopping, daily living skills to include med management, food preparation, house cleaning, hygiene, making appointments. 47% of individuals identified as a most important resource that would be needed in order to live independently would be access to assistive technology. Most individuals needed support to be more independent. We know that. We've heard it here multiple times. 27% of individuals responded that they needed somebody to check on them every few days. 27.59 said they needed support during the day. 24% said they needed support during the day and the night. And 15% said they didn't need help. There was a key subset of respondents and caregivers that suggested a service collaborator specializing in supports that enable individuals to transition to IL would be very needed. And as we have heard multiple times today across a lot of data, people really want to feel safe, right? That trumps and becomes the key need for individuals. They want to live in safe communities. 87.97% want to live near family and friends. 68% want access to social opportunities. And again, individuals who are Spanish speaking are falling through the cracks and not even getting to the front door to have some of these opportunities. So how do we take that and how do we as a service provider become part of the solution? One of the things, Imagine has a long history of being, when we were part of the community center board, we were required to be a provider of last resort for many, many years until the system changed. And through that, there was a lot of infrastructure that Imagine then put in place. Imagine has a lot of group homes. And as we also heard today, those were pretty darn innovative 20 years ago. But how do we utilize those spaces now? We have a lot of board certified behavioral analysts that we work with. And what we have really learned is that if you can provide the assessment of functional life skills, or the AFLs, through that, you can really help individuals to narrow down what skills that you can support them to develop, and then provide those mentorship-like skills to individuals to ensure that they are working towards that journey of getting those skills needed for independence. We can partner with tech organizations as part of your goal to find a friend today. Kyle from Safe and Home is here. And for those of you who are also not aware, remote supports are part of the most HCBS waivers, not the IDD or not the DD waiver, but a lot of the other waivers, and that remote technology can provide a portion of this solution, that safety-oriented tech, as well as those check-ins, as well as some independence furthering technology. We can, again, if we're looking at going towards outcomes, how do we teach people to make friendships? You know, so long in our history, services have been about going out into the community, the big group of individuals. How instead do we pivot that to really make that a skill building activity in which we are teaching individuals to make and keep friends? I think I'm getting my cue that it is time. All right, very quickly, last slide. Part of what we're doing is we are launching and have been working with independent living to bring in that skill building, that technology, that mentorship training, right? So that so much of what we are talking about is able for individuals to achieve. How do we marry that technology? How do we then free up staff time? Because if you have some of that technology to make sure that an individual is getting those daily reminders, that they are getting the call that it's time to go to work, some additional safety devices, that can free up staff time to really focus their time on skill building and on helping individuals to make friends and socialize so people living alone are not lonely. We're also changing, we do have a fleet of group homes. So how do we use those homes to be part of the solution? How do we use those for transitional housing to really teach individuals how to live independently by marrying these same concepts of technology usage and skill building? I just skipped a lot so that we could get done and you all could get a bathroom break. Feel free to find me if you have any questions, but I'm going to turn it back over to Rebecca.
Thank you. I'm sorry, we went over. I just wanted to say that here in this room, it's housing vouchers and other sources of rental assistance. In breakout room 3 is Medicaid 101, home and community-based services waivers work. And thank you, Jordan. Breakout room 2 is development financing of rental housing properties, maybe quick bathroom, water, and move on to your next breakout session. Thank you.
How much longer do we have until the next one starts now? Right now. It's like 2 minutes. Yeah, give like 2 more minutes. 5 minutes. I'm just gonna look at the rest and I'll be right back. Yeah, are you in our next group? Yeah. So I'll be right back. You're insane.
Good morning. If you're here for the housing vouchers and other sources of rental assistance breakout session, we'll get started in 2 minutes. If you're attending one of the other ones, I'd encourage you to go ahead and transition your conversations into the hallway as you get established in your other breakout room.
Okay. I love that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's at least another reminder. So. We don't have a thing. A flash drive or anything? I wish I did. Yeah. Before I do what I want to do, just unplug and replug, let me go double. Okay. Well, you can look at your stuff. Yeah, I feel way too much. Well, I was thinking. They brought their phones on tab. Is everybody confused, you know? I think, yeah, that's what it's all in.
I do have the presentation on this flash drive as well, so.
Okay, did you provide yours at this time?
Yeah.
Well, I can put on this one, we can double check it.
That would be fantastic.
Change this,
Okay.
of course. I always have to be difficult. And I haven't looked at it again. Here you go. Look at your.
Yeah, especially for like, yeah, I understand.
Very, like they made an Adobe InDesign.
I have no idea. I just learned how to use Canva, use this stuff, but that's about it.
They're pretty, in the EBD department, they're very stingy.
You use Adobe.
I use Adobe, I use Adobe. Do you know which presentation you guys are doing?
This is the, vouchers
Five.
and subsidies.
This one?
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so do you use these works like that? Like you plug them in, open up your presentation, and then unplug them?
Well, I copied and pasted it first,
Oh, okay.
just to double check. I think that's like the thing that's weird about it. Now it's the transcribe.
No, I'm not ready. I'll do a 10-minute and then a 5-minute warning and 2 thumbs up or time's up. So I know y'all are kind of collectively sharing your time. So we'll just, I'll sit right here and try to manage off of each other unless you want me to manage your smaller. units, but- But it's a press.
Oh, that's everyone's good.
I don't. Okay, you guys are also. Actually, we'd like to use the version that's on the.
Okay. All right, then you have to have Teams up because this one has Teams, so we can record everything.
Can we? That's fine. This is a. Can you just,
It's on.
take a jump drive for
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, I can pop it on the jump drive.
room in DC while I was at a conference. Oh, yeah, you were crazy busy last week. It's not gonna be a problem. Job.